Okay guys, so this morning just a question that came up in this Digital Ambition Circle group for bricks. This author here was asking the question of how to achieve a particular layout and whether it's possible using ACSS and frames. The layout they're referring to is this idea where you've got two columns, you've got some spacing on the left, you've got a media on the right which goes all the way to the right hand side. And looking at how this has been done, they are using automatic CSS. If we look at this section, we've basically got a standard brick section where they've set the padding on the left and right to 0. They've got a container which sets up all of your flex. I'm not sure why they've had to do this here, but what they've done is they've set the width to 100% to override the container width that bricks would have set, and they've set fixed widths on the items inside here, and then they've set the justify content to flex end to push it all to the end. So if we look at the styling there, so all the purple, that's the spacing, I guess. So we've got everything pushed to the end or the right hand side, and we've got some fixed widths on these which gives us our spacing on the left. That's one way of doing it. It does work. There's no right and wrong here. It's just one way or another. And if I look at this, the way they've got this working is the right hand image size scales, the left one pretty much stays the same. Then we get down to a breakpoint where it all goes to a single column. And that's working okay for them. I see here when we get to there, then we've got less margin on the side here, so they've got some calculations I think that do that. If we look at that, it was our sales tool content they call it. Yeah, so we've got a width with a calculation, and we've got a margin left using a section padding here. So that's one way of doing it. What I want to investigate whether there's a way of doing this with grid. So creating a 12 column grid which allows us to put our content wherever we want on that grid. So that's what I'm going to investigate now. There may already be a way that the guys at ACSS have already worked this out and figured this out. There may be some utilities for this. I haven't dug deep enough into ACSS yet to have a look, and they may have some better ways. So I'm just going to ponder one idea that I've got for doing this and see what you think. Okay, so head back over to our dummy test page here. So I've got a single page with no content on it. I'm just going to add a section to that. Now I've got some defaults on mine, so I've got some section padding top, bottom, left and right. So what I'm going to do first is get rid of my container. So containers give you the boxed width. We don't want that. We want to actually set our section to a 12 column grid. So I'm actually going to call this a grid 12 col. There you go, and I'll put 0 gap. That'll be my name, just to make it really obvious what it is. And on that, I'm going to just grab that class name because we may use this elsewhere. May not just use this on this one section. So I'm just going to grab that name and head over to our class manager up here in Bricks. Press the enter key on that so it creates my 12 column gap. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do first of all, I'm going to set my padding while I've got that selected, left and right of 0, because I want to be able to control exactly where my content goes to on the side. So I don't want any padding on the left or right. Okay, now I'm going to then go into my layout, my content, change to a grid display. I'm going to put a gap of 0 here. The reason I'm going to use 0 is because I want to use this as like a scaffolding. I don't want any spacing from this, which is going to create a problem when we wrap, but we'll deal with that soon. And the reason I don't want to do that is because we're going to use some frames structures, and frames already has all of its own spacing. So I don't want to interfere or add to the frames spacing. So let's make this a 12 column grid by using repeat. And let's say we want 12 columns at 1 fraction each. So 1 FR each, which means they're all equal 1 fraction of the width. And that's our grid there. Now on that grid, I'm going to add a couple of blocks. Actually, I'm going to get rid of these soon anyway. Okay, you can see there I've got 12 column grid on my section. I'm just going to add a section down here, and in that section I'm going to grab a frames layout. I'm going to use the same one that the author was trying to use, which is the featured grid, I think. So I'm going to look for that. Why am I not getting that? Remote templates, search, feature. Where is it? There it is there. I think it was this feature card delta they were trying to use. So I'm just going to add that into here so I've got the elements to work with. Now, what I'm going to now do is grab the, they wanted the media on the right hand side, didn't they? So I'm going to grab the content, I'm going to grab it, put it under my grid. Then I'm going to grab the media and I'm going to put that under the grid as well. And delete those two blocks that I put in there just to give me a display. Right now I can delete this section down the bottom here. So basically what I've done is I've added a frames layout and I've just grabbed the two inner content sections and stuck them on my 12 column grid. Now I can control where they sit. But let's have a look what we've got first. So if I just save that and have a look in the front end, and using my dev tools in Chrome, I'm going to go to my element selector, my layout, and I'm going to turn on the grid overlays for that grid I just created. Okay, and what we can see here, we've got a 12 column grid. Now, grids can be confusing because they start at 1. The first line is 1. The next point is 2, and that will actually include any spacing that we've got there. And then we get for a 12 column grid, it's 1 to 13 is the last line there. So 12 actually takes you to the 11th column, into the 11th column. 13 takes you to the end. You can also use the end keyword as well. So what I'm going to do here, I want to put my card here. I want to say I want to go from 3 through to maybe 7. Then I want to go with the image, I want to go from 7 to the end. Okay, so let's do that. Heading back to my editor, so I'm going to grab my content, and for my grid column, I'm going to say that goes from 3 to 7, and then my media, we're going to tell that to go from 7 to the end. Okay, and let's actually pick an image in there. So let's stick something in there so we can see what it's like. Any old image, save that. And here we go, we've got a good start, haven't we? That's pretty much what the author was asking for. So we've got this card here, and this card already has padding on it from the frame that we just inserted as a template, which is why I didn't want any extra spacing on my 12 column grid, because the frames already have padding and spacing to give you the spacing that you need. All right, we can make that bigger or smaller if you want to, but in this particular case, I'm just going to go with what frames has set for me. Okay, now then we get to work with this. So I think that for that width, that gets a little bit too high, doesn't it? So because this is actually scaling with the content, I don't want it to be that high and end up with lots of spacing at the top and the bottom. Let's have a look and say, let's go down a little bit. Let's say that's about, yeah, that's about right. We don't want any more spacing than that. So let's have a look at the height of this image and see what we've got. What do we got? 392 high, say 400, right? So we'll go back to our builder, and on that image there, we're going to set the maximum height for this image. You can do this with BEM class. I'm just going to do it with this one image. In this case, we're going to set our maximum height of being, what I say, I think it was 400. We're going to set the maximum height at 400. And with the default styling that's set on that bricks media, that's already set to, let's have a look there. Yep, it's already set to object fit cover, which comes from the frame. So this feature card delta image, it's telling it to give it to be 100% and set the object fit to cover. I'm overriding the maximum height so that it fits better with my content here. If I had more content, I might make that a little bit bigger. Right, so now we have a really simple way of deciding how that frame lays out. So we can scale that. And what you'll notice that's different about this than if you used a container with a box width is the whole thing scales according to your screen width. So all of these columns are multiples of a fraction of the width. So the whole lot scales as we do this, okay? So that is the big difference that we're going to see. Maybe you want that, maybe you don't. So, but we can see that we've got some consistent look and feel there. Okay, now, what happens if we want that to be the other way around? So let's go to duplicate that. Let's duplicate that. There it is there. And we're going to put our media on top of our content. You can also use the order attribute for that as well. Okay, so let's say now we want the media. What did we say this one was? That one goes from 3 to 7. So now we want the media on this one to go from 1 to 7. And we want the content to go from 7 to end. All right, let's have a look at that. All right, so now we got 1 to 7 and 7 to end, so that's just going to stay like that, right? Let's say we want to do similar to what we got at the top. What do we do there? We go from our media, we go actually we might leave that as 1 to 7. No, actually we'll change that. So let's go the content, instead of going 7 to end, let's go 7 to 11. That's not as big. So we want to go from media, we want to go from 1 to 7, and then on the content, let's go from 7 to 11 to give us some spacing at the end. Okay, there we go. So that's okay. So we've got control over each of these and how they set out. So that's a little bit more padding there, isn't it? So maybe that's too wide. You can see these lines here. So that image there and that one there are always going to line up because we've got the same grid spacing. Okay. And this one here is probably not wide enough. We need to make it a bit wider. It actually does look right. That does look right, sorry. We've got about the same amount that side there as we've got this side. So what we then do is come back to our editor here. And on any one of these, because we use the class, we can go to the actual class and go, what do we want to happen when we get to our mobile breakpoint? Okay, so let's say on the mobile breakpoint, we want this to be one row, one column. So we go 1 FR. All right, so on mobile breakpoint, we've got 1 FR. Okay, now this is going to do some strange things, which I'll show you here. Mobile breakpoints there. You can't actually tell here, but you get some really weird spacing. Let me show you here. See, that seemed to work okay. I have had situations where you end up with these extra columns because you're telling this to start at number 3 or whatever. You get these extra bits in here. I'm going to show you the way to overcome that. So if you do get that when you're on this breakpoint, unfortunately there's no way you can do this with the UI, but you can just add a style. We're going to we've got our class selected there. In our styles, we're going to say root, and then we're going to go followed by anything. So the first of anything that is a direct descendant of that root. So in this case, with the content and the media, we want to set the grid column, I think it's called. Let me have a look. Grid column, yep. So we changed the grid column. I keep getting confused between whether we use the plural or the singular on these. So we're going to use grid column, and we're going to go auto. And that's going to force it to start and end auto, and that fixes a problem which can sometimes occur where you get extra bits from these. And there we go. Now, what you're seeing here though is we're getting some padding from the card, so we don't need to worry about adding any additional gap to that 12 column grid there. So this works okay. On our sections, we've got some extra padding, which is why that's showing there. And on these, I'd say maybe on the second one, so that's around the right way. What we got there? We got the context of the copy and then the image. And then we've got the context of the copy and then the image. No, we haven't. Where's our image gone? Let me have a look at that. So I'm just going to change that image to something else. Maybe it's a mountain. Oh, that's bizarre. It hasn't changed in the editor. Let's have a look and see if it actually changed. It did, just not in the editor. So there we go. So we've got our layout there. Now, I'm doing F5 just to make sure we've got something weird happening here. Something very strange happening to that image. So we got, what's happened to our image? Oh, there it is there. We've overridden it on the ID. What if I made that important? There we go. So because I overrode it on the ID, we lost the image. I'm going to have to add, come back to my 12 column grid there, style, ACSS, add important. So because I overrode the grid column at the ID level for these elements here, because I overrode it at the ID level, this doesn't apply. Have a look now. Okay, there we go. So now we've got our copy image, image copy, which we don't really want, do we? So the other thing we need to look at here is maybe we need to reorder these like that. And we need to, that's okay, we can do content, media. Okay, so here's the thing, if we want to order this semantically correct, so we've got our content and our media, then it tries to create a new row because the media is saying to go back to row 1, but it's already partway through that row, row there. So the way you resolve that is when you're looking at your content, you set the grid row to 1, and media, you set the grid row to 1, and then they're both on the same row. All right, so we probably should do that as a standard. So when you're setting up your content, set up your grid column, set the grid row to 1. And now we have, on mobile, we've got our content, media. Why is that broken? Because they're both on the same row, so that's not going to work. Okay, so that didn't work for us. What can we do? Okay, so if we go to our mobile breakpoint, there is our issue there. We could solve this by taking the media, putting it on row 2 when we get to that. That would solve the problem. Are we better off trying to think of other ideas? What could we do instead of changing the grid rows? I guess what we could do is come back to a class system. So I'm just going to get rid of that there. I'm going to create a class which will be my, let's put it up the top here, create a new class. I'm going to call this layout content media. I don't know, maybe this isn't the right way to do it, but I'm going to try that. Called layout content media. Okay, and then I'm going to on content, I'm going to call that layout content media content. Okay, and then on the media, I'm going to call that layout content media media. And using my normal standard, I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to put that on there. And on the contents, I'll do the same. Okay, so the content here, I'm going to go layouts, content, media's contents, layout, content, media. Media, you get the same classes on those. So I'm saying it's a layout where we've got content and media. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to say that on the when we've got a standard layout, so layout content media content desktop, we want everything to be on grid row 1. So that's grid row 1. And the media, we want that to be on grid row 1. And then when we're looking at the mobile breakpoints, so if we go down to mobile, we want the layout content to be on 1. And we want the media to be on 2. Okay, let's see how that works. Media. Okay, I'm not sure why it's not displaying correctly here yet. Let's have a look. Still not working there either. Why? Media, grid row 1. Is that still grid row 1? Ah, we must have overwritten it. Okay, so let's go to take off the class. That we did. I overrode it at the ID level, which is why it didn't work. That's a very common mistake to make when you're using classes. Okay, save that now. Okay, there we go. So, we've got our layout where we've got our content and our media, our content and our media. We go to the larger the mobile breakpoint, we've got a content, media, media, content. The layout is exactly the same as far as the HTML goes. So in each one of these, I go the content and then the media. And the next one, I've got content and then media. But by using the grid system, I'm telling it in this particular case to put the content from this grid row to that grid row, grid column I should say, to that grid column, and put the media from this grid column of 1 through to that grid column. And with the extra class here, I'm going to copy those here, put those onto the structure so that it makes sense to me. So by using this BIM structure, I've got my now 12 column grid gap there, which is basically my 12 columns with no gap. It's pretty simple. And then I've basically created a template with my frames, dragged my card in as the content into there, dragged my media as the media into there. I've created a layout content media as a element, and I've put on the media contents. I've on my mobile breakpoint, that doesn't do anything at the standard breakpoint. At the mobile breakpoint, my media content is on grid row 1. My media is on grid row 2. And that's pretty much what I've done to rearrange these things. So I think it works. It gives you a lot of flexibility in how this works, the layout. Yeah, so that's one way of doing it. You can still use your frames from your templates, but you decide how to lay that out based on a 12-column grid. The things to know about here is that it's not the same as using, if you used a container which has got a box layout of say 1200 wide, that stays at 1200 until the screen width gets less than 1200. When you're using a grid like this, it's fluent throughout the entire width of your screen as it moves. So it is different. It's more fluid than the box layout, which you need to be aware of, but it gives you an enormous amount of flexibility. Okay, sure that I use the Bricks UI as much as possible for those that aren't that familiar with CSS. So the only handwritten CSS you have to do is on the desktop breakpoint here for the column gaps. Where did I put that? This is the problem with using the UI. It's trying to figure out where did I put my CSS. It's not there. Save that and just do a refresh. F5. Sometimes Bricks plays up on us as well. So let's see if it's there. So if I go to my columns here, go to my column gap, grid, no zero, gap, layouts, headings left and right 0. I've lost it. Absolutely lost it. Okay, so where is it? Where is it? I did put some CSS here to collapse. Oh, this is where it gets confusing using the Bricks UI for this. I'm hunting around for my CSS, and then I've just remembered that it is on this class, but it's at the mobile breakpoint, and then I can see my CSS. And then I've got this one line of CSS which targets every element after the root, so every basically element that I put under that structure, and I'm setting the grid column to auto important at this breakpoint, so it all collapses to one row. Now, this is where it gets really tricky using Bricks UI. It's really simple to create. It gets more complicated when you come back and you're trying to figure out where you put your code. So as a last comment here, what I would typically do with this sort of thing is I would find that CSS. So I go into my page view, all the CSS here that was created from that point there through to all the stuff we've created. So that's not all of this, unfortunately. So I'd actually copy all that, stick it into a Notepad++, or there is my Bricks created CSS. Take out the frame stuff there. Frames. Okay, so here's pretty much what we just created. So we've got a 12-column grid with all our rules for the 12-column grid, and our media breakpoint of mobile landscape. We're setting the grid template columns to one frame, and grid column auto important for all elements underneath that grid. And then at our mobile breakpoint of 767 for our layout content, media content, we're setting the grid row to 1. That's pretty much the CSS. So that is so much easier to see than it is to try and go through, figuring out through here which breakpoint did I put it on, which element did I put it on. You can see it there. I would typically create this in Bricks, I would then cut it out of bricks, I would stick it into an external code manager, and then delete all this from bricks. That's just the way I would work, but this is just a pondering. I reckon it's a great way to be able to lay out your code exactly how you want it. But yeah, I'd love to hear what you guys think. Is this a good idea, bad idea, or is there something in ACSS or Frames that already does this? Then I'm completely missing the point. So let me know. Thank you.